This program contains mild nudity that may offend some younger viewers. We recommend guidance from a parent or other adult.
In true New Zealand tradition, he played rugby.
An afternoon in which the certainty of experiencing drama. And take a run for the big hill there just before Hamilton.
Hello everyone, and welcome.
50 years ago, television's arrival in New Zealand was greeted with enthusiasm. Here was a medium that could show each and every one of us what the rest of the country looked like, and what we were doing, saying and thinking. It could help to foster a sense of who and what we were. It could reveal the great diversity that makes up the New Zealand identity.
We're interested in who we are and how we fit together, and it's a big issue for us, I think, because we're on the arse end of the universe, and we're a very small country with not very many people. So it does kind of fascinate us, and I think television is a great way to examine that.
We used to angst about the great New Zealand novel. People don't do that anymore. They accept that there isn't one great New Zealand novel. There are lots of novels, and they all talk about New Zealand in different ways, and that's what it is with television as well.
But acceptance of some aspects of New Zealand identity didn't come easily. And 21 years after television began, we were still reluctant to embrace the New Zealand accent on screen.
Good evening. Well, tonight we feature part 2 of our Sweetwater's 81 special with more split ends, plus Aussie bands, Flowers and Cold Chisel.
There must have been an elocution department. There probably was, because there was a department for everything. And he tested my voice, and I suppose it was all the rain and Spain business, and said, well, you've got a lazy tongue, which I thought was... Really? Lazy tongue, okay. That's probably a good thing. No, but go away and use it, because it'll be the making of you.
By the way, congratulations to Pop Mechanics on their recent success.
But some viewers weren't ready for the sound of Karen Hayes' voice and reacted with outrage.
Yes, I do remember a number of sort of interesting feedback letters, in fact several hundred. But, you know, talk to most of those people that wrote those, they'd probably talk the same way.
Problems over the Kiwi accent on screen had been a feature of New Zealand television since the beginning.
Well, I first started in 1964, and in those days we had to have what was called received pronunciation, which was basically BBC pronunciation. If you didn't have that, you didn't get on the air, so every trace of a New Zealand vowel was knocked out of you.
We've got a great habit of burying our heads in the sand and then screaming blue murder when someone shoots us in the tail feathers.
We were suffering from terrible colonial cringe. We just didn't want to be New Zealanders. There was no sense in those days, except on the sporting field perhaps and in war, that New Zealanders were proud of being New Zealanders. We were slightly apologetic for it.
There are 2 overnight limiteds. One leaves at 4:30 and arrives at 7 a.m.
That's how I got a job, because I sounded pommy. I think it was thought that what a good thing. The more we can have people who actually sound like those chaps that we see on Panorama. And so, you know, the fact that you had an accent which occasionally was halfway between Prince Charles and Ted Heath was no disadvantage early on.
Slowly, the voice of ordinary New Zealanders began to be heard on television.
When did you last have a square meal?
Monday night, about 1:30.
We used to fall about laughing at the accents of, even the sight of New Zealand people. To us, it was such a novelty. They appeared complete freaks.
Can't miss on the Ranfurly Shield this year. There's not a team to beat them.
By the end of the 60s, New Zealand's ties to Britain were weakening.
Britain was joining the European economic market, and New Zealanders felt very resentful about this, you know. I mean, we fed those bloody Poms for 2 world wars, you know. Our boys died for them, you know. And then as soon as there's a fast buck to be made out of the frogs, they've dumped us, you know. And then suddenly it started to dawn on, at a grassroots level, that we were on our own. And since we were New Zealand, and we were no longer hanging off the coattails of Mother England, then perhaps we should find out who we are. And television generally is a great window into who we are.
As our ties to Britain weakened, real New Zealand characters began to appear on screen, and one of the first to emerge was Fred Dagg.
What we are about to receive, we must remember to thank the old Sheila.
I run the place with my sons, of whom there are approximately half a dozen. Trevor here, he's the firstborn, and he's the eldest as a result of that. And he's a little thick.
Fred Dagg was a character who had emerged from my fooling about with my friends.
Trevor, on the other hand, is more your sheep man.
When I was asked to do some television at the end of 1973, that was the character I decided to do because it was a national character.
Trevor, on the other hand, is very interested in crops. He's actually something of a bore on all other known subjects, but on crops, he really knows his onions.
It was the everyman's language. He was talking to his audience and we understood the humour. We understood where he was coming from. We understood the environment he was living in. We understood the concept of the brothers, everyone called Trevor. So it was a huge open door for us to look at ourselves.
What I liked about Fred Dagg was that he had a physical kind of appearance, but quite a lot of it was language. That was the way that people expressed what they said, not particularly what they said. And that I thought was a real characteristic of New Zealanders.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, g'day. Late item just to hand. Matter of fact, from late item from Timaru.
Fred Dagg would often look off camera and say hello to a mate of his who was driving past in a truck.
G'day.
In order to indicate that he wasn't from the This Is How You Do Television school, he was from New Zealand. He was from the audience. That was his great advantage.
John Clark headed for Australia in 1977, but another distinctly New Zealand voice was about to hit our screens.
And then along came Jeanette MacDonald as Lynn of Tawa, who assumed a character who was very much a Kiwi gal. That caused so many letters to editor and upheavals, but I had to defend her because I said I've met women every day who sound exactly like Lynn of Tawa, not like Jeanette, who doesn't speak like that in real life.
Working? Oh. Hello, Tawa, and good evening, New Zealand.
Yes, there's an uptightness, or there was, to New Zealand. People say, that Lynn, I mean, no one talks like that, they'd say.
Oh, my name's Lynn and I come from Tawa. That's up the line a bit, eh? The psychiatrical hospital's up there.
By the end of the 80s, there were more ordinary Kiwis on screen, but there were still problems with the voice.
The real TV treat.
I put on a rural accent, and I can remember a cousin of mine came up to me and he says, "Ho, how come you talk like that on the TV, Al? We don't talk like that. You make us sound dumb."
For those of you who can't understand the native tongue of this land, tough.
And I remember receiving that and thinking we can't actually hear ourselves because we're so used until we see it on television or hear it on the radio and we hear it and we go, do we really sound like that?
Whoa! Oh, where's your mum?
More than 30 years after New Zealand got television, Shortland Street brought us more Kiwi accents and yet more criticism.
Listen, lady, if you don't hurry up and get a doctor, I'm going to bleed to death.
First things first. And I think it was a real shock to people because they hadn't heard New Zealand accents in a drama context for a while, and there were lots of complaints about, Kirsty sounding like a Kiwi.
I should have listened to you. Oh, shit. I should have never gone out.
And a lot of those young actors had no formal training and they sounded like real people. And I think that was a real surprise to the audience.
You can't feed on history. Yes, you can and you must.
You listen to the evening paper, one of those very first dramas.
Well, that wasn't going to be me.
The jump between there and
Shortland Street, say, now is enormous.
You are drunk, you're putting yourself at risk, and you need to go home.
Do you want a slap as well?
Because the evening paper had come out of a kind of Britishness of presentation, which doesn't happen now.
No one gets embarrassed.
But the Kiwi accent's only one aspect of our identity. And over the years, television has brought the people and the country into our living rooms.
Bugger.
Most New Zealanders now live in cities. But what happens in the rural heartland has been a source of fascination for program makers and even advertisers.
Bugger.
Well, that Toyota Bugger ad, and that was a wonderful... It was sublime in the sense that it told the story about New Zealand heartland in just one word.
Ooh, bugger me.
People had heard people swear in movies and stuff, but people had never heard anyone swear in a commercial. And I guess it was just came out of the blue.
Hey, Brad.
Bugger.
Bugger.
The Bugger ad struck a chord that's long been a major part of the New Zealand identity, our attachment to the countryside.
I got a new brown sports coat. I got a new pair of grey strides. I got a real Kiwi haircut. Bit off the top and short back and side.
I mean, I was in Dunedin and, you know, we covered Otago and Southland, and so we would go out and we would do local stories in places like Tuatapere and Mosgiel, and it was fantastic.
They look at the Sheilas cutting the supper.
And we would arrive and it would be news in the newspaper that television had arrived in town, and you know, people would come out with their scones and things. It was a big thing that television was there, and they loved seeing themselves on screen.
Yeah, it's great giving cheek to the Sheilas down the hall on Saturday night.
Bringing rural stories to New Zealand screens took off in 1966 with the start of Country Calendar, the longest-running program on New Zealand television.
Way back when it started in the 60s, it was basically a farming program, or program for farmers. You know, we are talking the 60s, but even 3 generations back, there was a direct association between most people in town. It may not have been Dad who was on the farm, but they probably had an uncle or a cousin or someone, so they had I suppose, a direct contact with the land.
This relationship with the land led early television makers out of the cities and into the country.
We were constantly exploring ourselves and our New Zealand. Country Calendar did it magnificently, was constantly on the road into, you know, every nook and cranny. And then I did a really major 23-day muster, and there was great controversy over that because I filmed a sequence of the 6 musterers leaving a hut, racing over stony ground, a riverbed, diving into a river, having a wash and running back. And they were completely naked and there was sort of full frontal nudity. And there was a hell of a discussion as to whether that could play or not, and eventually with some nervousness the powers that be allowed it to go to air.
More than 40 years after it began, Country Calendar is still attracting television viewers in the cities to stories about the rural heartland.
An often asked question is, but how did Country Calendar manage to, if you like, attract the attention of the urban dwellers?
I mean, 90% of the population live in cities, that's it. So perhaps it's the romance, the idyllic nature of the quietness and the slowness of country life.
This is the highest pass in the country that cattle go through. I think it's just over 4,500 feet, something like that. It's a long way from the bottom anyway, I know that.
This fondness for the countryside led to another long-running show, where dogs and shepherds vied for stardom.
I think New Zealanders have always liked to see themselves reflected in a rural sense, and they liked that with the dog show. There was, I think, what now, at 5 o'clock, 5:30 was a dog show, and then 6 o'clock the news, and after the news there was Country Calendar, and God was in heaven and all was well.
there might have been a wee gap left for them there. Don may not have been in the right position to hold as an extension of the wings to the bridge, which is what the dog is there for on that side, but they're over nicely, but it won't be perfect.
The tension was quite simply based on will they or won't they, and there's a lot of won't about sheep.
Up down. 2 minutes 45 left.
And the tension just built and built, and to some extent, as a commentator, you're a little bit like a parasite. You could just hop along with that and milk it for all it was worth.
Here is the left, which needs to be held. And a bit more yet.
I think that was the stage where most of the adult population still had a relation living in the New Zealand countryside. That is not the case now. And being able to sit in the front lounge and see that sort of idealism reflected in the television screen, I think made people feel quite comfortable, and it gave them a sense of identity.
This sense of identity was further enhanced when the Natural History Unit began to make stories about New Zealand wildlife.
The Wild South was an enormously popular series. I think the appeal was New Zealanders were discovering New Zealand. We didn't know anything about our flora and fauna. We didn't know about kakapo or kia or, we didn't realise that so many of our species were facing extinction, and I think it was a total revelation.
After 50 years of European settlement, forests were gone, many birds were extinct, and the black robin had disappeared from all but this last sanctuary on Little Mangere Island.
I think the Chatham Islands black robin, which was the little bird that basically went to the edge of extinction, there was one female left. And that was, I think, a story that really captured people's hearts. And to watch the struggle and the work of Don Merton to save that species from extinction and to bring them back from the edge was, I think, and that was a huge landmark.
And there are now 9 effective breeding pairs. By the end of another year's cross-fostering, there should be over 60 robins on the Chathams.
I think the black robin would have been helped anyway by Department of Conservation, Wildlife Service. But I think they were probably encouraged in their work by having it on television, and that New Zealanders could see what was being done.
You are less likely to destroy things that you understand. And if we could give people an insight and help them understand, it's like for example, the yellow-eyed penguin, or, again, pushed right to the edge.
Today, yellow-eyed penguins come ashore to a very different coast.
So this is an enormously rich country, and we opened up a whole world to an audience about the place they lived in, and I think that really resonated.
Wild South's popularity would be echoed whenever television ventured into the country, and over the years we've traversed the length and breadth of New Zealand. Defining what it means to be a Kiwi has taken television makers around the country. But while small-town New Zealand has been a feature of television since the 60s, by the beginning of the 90s, the connection between city and country was harder to see.
There was a disconnect growing, if you like, between television and the rural community. And I think if you lived somewhere outside the cities, you had the feeling that television might be about New Zealand, but it wasn't about them.
Through the early 90s, the Heartland series tried to redress this situation by bringing us stories from all over the country.
Maniatoto, that was a very early one, Maniatoto. It was magic because of the freezing conditions and snow and ice.
I maintain a man that soils his hand and tills the land, he gets a much greater kick out of life than sitting at an office desk,
And you see the sort of nature of the people and the impact of the seasons on them and the way they utilise everything to have as much fun as is available.
It reminded people in the city of what this country is like and what it's about. Sometimes the town itself would react against it and didn't like it.
Chloe was, well, that was a problem one. She turned into something of a phenomenon in her own right, and Wainui Amata rose in arms and rejected both the Heartland episode and Chloe and everything connected with them.
Look, Chloe, I actually want to ask you a favour.
What's that?
The Wainui Martians didn't realise at the time that, in fact, the press they got from that was very good press. And the Chloe character, she was embraced by New Zealand as a stereotype, admittedly, but she was embraced by New Zealand. She wore these shoes, these slippers.
You know those slippers that you like me and Gary?
I do, yes.
Well, you know what? This is where I bought them from.
I might be able to get a pair.
Some
Well, let's have a look, yeah.
And apparently Hannah's called us and said, "Thank you very much. We have had to bring in from Asia or China another 2 containers of those slippers that Chloe was wearing in Wainui Amata. Everyone wants the Chloe slippers."
They bring out the animal in you, hey, Gary?
New Zealand has an inability, I fear, especially in small towns, to be able to laugh at themselves. When, like, Havoc Newsboy did a thing about gore, which is just superb television, it's taking the piss. That's all it's doing. And it's saying, come on, let's have a laugh at ourselves.
Yeah, so we go sit down around the massive brown trout, which is the centrepiece of Gore Township, and just sort of came up with that. This is Gore. It's a place where men meet men. It's New Zealand's homosexual capital.
The first gay man in New Zealand was born here in Gore in 1872.
And there's still a huge, thriving underground community of gay people who just don't tell anyone.
Gore.
Gore, the G's for gay.
Holy shit! Not only did people say, hang on a second, what did you call us? The gay capital of New Zealand. But the mayor was on the front page of the paper threatening to drive us out of town with sticks and bits of wire. And
you know, they were saying Gore is not the gay capital, it's actually the brown trout capital.
Well, I can see why they call it Gore. It's absolutely gorgeous.
So, I mean, the thing with doing that, and in hindsight, I'm slightly embarrassed about what we did, only because a lot of these towns don't get a lot of exposure, and then the only bit of exposure they would get would be on a national TV show, and it would be negative.
Yeah, well, small towns have always been ridiculed and belittled by TV. They've always been the providers of the light entertainment stories or the quaint folk that'll have a ceiling with 1,000 pairs of socks on it and all sorts of stuff. So it was important for me to show that there were people with depth and passion and that had great lives and weren't sort of missing out on anything or weren't there because they were inbred. They were just, they were there by choice and loving it.
Not just about looking in through a TV camera and sort of looking down. It's about being in amongst it and bringing people inside with you into those communities.
Things commentators not here today, but they're all away in the 100 metres. I've been here commentating for probably 18 years, but I've been coming to the sport since I was probably 8 years of age, which I'm 62 now. That's, 54 years or something of sports. So, and there's a lot of people here been going longer than what I have. Harry Newcastle's got my way. Come on there.
If you think about it, the programs that really push our nostalgia button are the ones that show us all about us. And so the country calendars and heartland type programs, and even today with the stuff that Marcus is doing, stuff about us.
Perhaps the most surprising stuff about us has been filmed overseas. The Big OE has long been a part of being a New Zealander, and through television we've got to look at ourselves through the trials and tribulations of Kiwis that fly.
I've never really travelled much, let alone somewhere as challenging as Kenya. I'm going on safari far from five-star hotels.
So travelling overseas and out of our comfort zone means that suddenly we are thrown on our mettle, and I think we see the makeup of the Kiwi character.
It's like a society in the last stages of decay. It's kind of odd. You don't think that people can make lives out of this sort of stuff. Bizarre.
I went to Kenya, and basically the reality for me was that I ended up, because I've always had a dodgy gut, but my gut ended up nearly killing me. 13 times to the loo in one night and dropping the torch into the... When I came back here, it made me realise where and how we live. It changed my viewpoint quite a lot.
So I'm sitting in my office as Mayor of Invercargill, the phone rings and they say, "Oh, Mayor Tim, it's Television New Zealand here. We'd like to send you on a free overseas trip." I said, "Oh, that's fantastic." They said, "Yes, we had Marcus Lush, he's from down your way now. We sent him to Egypt." And I said, "Egypt?" And the pyramids appeared before me and the Sphinx. I said, "Oh, yes, you can definitely put my name down for that." They said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Of course I'm sure." They said, "Great, we're sending you to Borneo." And I said, "What the hell am I meant to do in Borneo?" They said, "Oh, you'll be a hero. We've got you climbing Mount Kinabalu. It's the highest mountain in Southeast Asia. It's higher than Mount Cook." I said, "Higher than Mount Cook? I don't think you realise how many pavlovas I've got to eat as Mayor of Invercargill." I said, "I can't climb Mount Cook."
The morning that we were about to start the trek, it was pouring with rain. And Tim admits, I said, "Oh, well, you went to the gym, did you, Tim?" "Oh, well, I went up and down my back step a few times. That'd be enough, wouldn't it?" And we thought, oh dear. I mean, I'm not the fittest person in the world either, but it's a 2-day climb.
They said, "Oh, we don't expect you to do it, just an honest attempt, you know." I said, "All right." I thought, here we go, more humiliation. I'll practice my lines this time. So I thought I'll get 100 yards up this silly bloody hill, pretend to trip over, fall back into a little ravine, look up at the camera and say, "The bastard knocked me off!" Just kidding. Oh, yes. Oh, we made it. And to celebrate, what have we got here? Spirit of Southland flag. We can go anywhere. And the old mate, the Kiwi. Mwah.
Trying to work out what being a Kiwi means has been the source of much of our television. And along the way, we've discovered that New Zealand art and artists have made a major contribution to our culture.
She's picked a better time than ours.
Over the past 50 years, television has helped to define various aspects of New Zealand's culture. And in the process, it's brought the work of artists like Rita Angus to a much wider audience.
That painting has never been off the wall as far as I know. And every time I go back to the Christchurch Art Gallery, it always lifts my spirits. You know, it's a fantastic, iconic New Zealand image.
This is New Zealand's favourite painting.
We are incredibly strong in all the arts. So to make documentaries about the arts seems perfectly natural, actually, because it's just such a strength in our culture.
I just see myself as a person who has particular things that I want to make work about, and fortunately, every now and then, there's a window of opportunity that allows me access to the television audience. So, I mean, my most recent one like that would be Lovely Rita.
New Zealand had begun covering art in the late 1960s and gave artists a level of recognition they could never have got otherwise.
You didn't see anything about New Zealand art much for a while. But then it's actually started to do it quite well.
Hello, Greer.
Hello, Keith.
Well, it's a long time since we've met. In fact, the last time, as I remember, you were making puppets.
I've still got the script somewhere, which tells everything. You know, what the camera angles are, what I'm going to be asked, what I'm going to be doing, what I will say. Every inch of it was scripted out, which I found fascinating. Not like this, where you're just asking me questions and I'm blabbering on. It was a totally controlled thing.
Well, I don't feel it is distorted because it's my sort of bird. It's not any particular sort of bird, it's just a bird.
Oh, touche. You've got me there.
By the 80s, artists were being recognised for their contribution to New Zealand culture through Kaleidoscope, a weekly 90-minute arts programme on prime-time television.
Well, Kaleidoscope was the first of those series, and that was a very good program. Those programs are very popular on television. You know, especially where they're doing how you do it, the observation of people doing things.
I got really interested in the fact that television was a medium in which you could enlarge the culture and enlarge the experience of the culture. I did a little bit of work for Kaleidoscope, but not much. And with Bruce Morrison, we made Profiles, which was an attempt to actually make a reality out of people who made art.
I'm not consciously trying to do anything except paint. The more of the unconscious that comes in, the better. What I'm trying to do.
In the 1990s, Kaleidoscope gave way to Work of Art, a series of documentaries that explored the work of New Zealand artists.
He had an old coat. He wore his toenails long. The newspapers made up stories about him to entertain the housewives.
He was extremely unpopular because everyone was in suits at the time when he was, you know, taking off his shoes and throwing away clothes and going barefoot into Jerusalem. So he was a cultural conundrum inside a really buttoned-down New Zealand.
He had, let us say, a problem of identity.
A number of the documentaries about the arts that I've made have been about people that I think deserve to be better known.
I was absolutely amazed to find that when I was working on my retrospective exhibition, we had to sort through 50,000 negatives. That's 40 years of photographs. It really began as the response of a stranger in a strange land and became, for me, a lifetime passion.
Not as many people go to an exhibition as see a documentary on television. So the documentary about Marty brought her to a much wider public.
I just knew I had to get it. It was the light, it was the dust. But of course, every photograph I took was like that. It was this impulsive, intuitive need to actually photograph. And what's going on in my mind when I was doing it then was, it is so New Zealand.
The arts reflect the soul of a country. And I think that, you know, to get to know our arts, you've got to have art documentaries on television to bring knowledge of our artists and their work to a wider audience.
For half a century, Dennis Glover exerted his often troubled, sometimes drunk, and always contentious influence on our writing.
And I love Dennis Glover's work. He's not really well known, but his Magpie poem is probably one of the best known poems in New Zealand.
The farm's still there, mortgage corporations couldn't give it away, and quaddle-doodle-addle, waddle-doodle, the magpies say. Come by Dennis Glover.
I thought he was a worthy New Zealander. His story needed to be told. Poetry and art feeds us, and it gives us really something to be proud of, as well as sport. We are a very creative nation. It's just about being proud of it and being willing to take that risk and put it on our screens.
I'm in a small town called Pukerua Bay in New Zealand. Behind me is the house of an elderly lady called Hannah Mackenzie.
Just appearing on television helped turn artists into iconic figures. And the audience was less than forgiving when they discovered the truth about a creative genius called Colin Mackenzie.
I just got inspired by the thought of making a film about a filmmaker and then recreating all his old movies. And it was that challenge, I think, that drew Peter Jackson into the project and why he got involved with it.
I had no way of realising the significance of these films at the time. We later discovered they were made between the turn of the century and the late 1920s by an extraordinary New Zealander, a man who has now got to join the ranks of the great film pioneers, a guy called Colin Mackenzie.
Colin Mackenzie is actually an amalgam of some real people, and so there's actually a genuine attempt made by Peter and I to affectionately honour real people in New Zealand history, people like Richard Pearce. Minutes before takeoff, Colin positioned his camera above a wagon and waited.
I had the privilege of shooting Colin Mackenzie's footage, so it was my eye, you know, pretending to be Colin Mackenzie, and it was quite fun, you know, finding ways to make it feel authentic, I guess, even though it was complete bullshit.
Colin mechanised his camera with great ingenuity. When Colin rode the bicycle, his camera rolled, thus creating the cinema's first tracking shots. So we got carried away with all that, and I think we underestimated the effect that the actual hoax would have. So of course it was genuine shock and consternation on my part when we found that people actually believed it, and then got really, really angry when they found out that they'd been had. You know, we're a small nation, and we like to think that we punch above our weight, and we like to jump onto the coattails of the heroes that we see emerge. We gave people a hero, someone who had done things before anyone else, and I guess people were just too quick to claim him.
But television hasn't always been about icons, real or imagined. It's just insights into the cultural diversity that makes New Zealand special. Television has played a variety of roles in one of the most important aspects of New Zealand identity, the country's ethnic diversity. When New Zealanders got up in the middle of the night to watch Hinewehe Mohi sing the national anthem at the 1999 World Cup, they got a version they weren't expecting.
For me, it seemed a very natural thing to do, to sing it in Māori. I was just brimful of pride for it, and I really wanted it to be a sensation. And then, yes, well, the kaka hit the fan the next day.
I was absolutely so disappointed that nobody could sing the national anthem.
I remember watching it at the time and I thought, oh, she didn't sing the English part. And I thought, I don't think she would have forgotten, but I honestly didn't take it as an act of terrorism, because that's not Hinewehe. But that's not to say that she's naive or that she didn't understand an impact that that could have. But now I look at it proudly that she's the reason why we sing in both languages.
I just couldn't really get my head around why people would be so angry. Māori is a part of anyone who embraces being a New Zealander, and it's something that's inherent in the earth and inherent in this land, and something that we should be proud about.
The reaction to the national anthem being sung in Māori wasn't that surprising. Before the arrival of Māori television, the language was seldom heard in prime time.
We made the first primetime TVNZ Māori language series last year called One Land.
I think the biggest challenge is dealing with, dare I say it, natives.
It was taking a format that had worked previously with Pioneer House, with Colonial House, and was putting a Māori twist on it. It was actually adding Māori heart.
When you either see people in adverse situations or in their everyday life, then you see the real New Zealanders and real stories.
You can't come in because in your lives you've stolen, you didn't pay your account at the dairy, you've blasphemed, not to mention being racist to every single culture that exists.
Trying to define what it means to be a real New Zealander presented television with the problem of finding a place for the wide variety of people that live here.
Oh, yeah, there was a show, I can't remember what it's called, but it had buzzy bees and it was like this lady, you know, at the end of the show she'd say, did all my friends have fun at play? And then she'd go, and I can see you, Timothy, and you, John, and you. Romper Room, that's the one. It was Romper Room, and it was brilliant. And I used to stay right to the end of the show and think, I wonder if they're going to say my name. And then they did. But then my friend next to me, his name was Siosi. And they never said Siosi's name because there was no Siosis about then.
There were Siosis at the time of Romper Room. They'd been arriving from Samoa since the days before television. But to most New Zealanders, they'd remained largely invisible.
Welcome to the unofficial capital of Polynesia, Auckland.
Well, when I came up from Christchurch to Auckland to make a documentary about the Islanders, who really hadn't featured on television at all before, and to be honest, there were very few Maori on television either in those days, and we spent most of our time around Ponsonby, and I'd never seen anything like that before, and I'd certainly never been in a place where there were lots and lots of brown faces.
If New Zealanders knew very little about their Polynesian neighbours, I knew nothing about them at all.
Before you came here, what did people tell you about New Zealand? What did they say it was like for an islander in New Zealand?
They said it was a land of temptations.
A land of complications?
Temptations.
Of temptations.
In those days, islanders were, not really integrated into the society as they are now. They were a very separate, exotic Auckland phenomena. And of course, with any new group, you had all kinds of lurid stories about whatever they did. So it was really good to go and show the complete picture rather than just the extravagant headlines.
Annie's first impressions are a mixture of excitement, fear, and most of all, homesickness. While the rest of the household are out at work, a Samoan neighbour helps her to settle in.
Although the number of Pacific Islanders grew through the 70s and 80s, they were rarely seen on our screens before the arrival of Tangata Pacifica in 1987.
Whangalawhalahi atu. Tālofa lava, kia orana, malo elelei, nisabula, taloha lava. Welcome to our first program of Tangata Pacifica, People of the Pacific.
Made us feel part of New Zealand even more, because you saw other Pacific Islanders doing things, and you found out, wow, we got artists. I didn't know we had artists. Where do we go to see these artists? And fulfilled that, and gave us a sense of pride that some of the artists were appearing regularly on TV, and we were going, hey, it's one of ours.
Every morning when I wake up, I drink my coconut.
In the early 90s, TV3 took a chance with a comedy show featuring Pacific Island characters.
I think the thing with Skits which was really interesting was that it was quite a breakthrough when I look back on it, I think, in terms of sort of racial and cultural comedy. I mean, it was a little edgy, and it was probably not that politically correct when you look at it in retrospect. But I think at the time, it was a big step forward.
Okay, now I paid you my accommodation supplement. I see your accommodation supplement and raise you a special benefit. I see your special benefit and I raise you with the child with a disability allowance.
The then manager of TV3 saw the program and tried to cancel it. Because he was a Canadian, he'd come from Canada, and was convinced that this material was so outrageous that crowds of Polynesians from South Auckland were going to march on the TV3 studios at Flower Street and surround the building, and he would not get home for dinner.
Over the past 15 years, television has begun to take a more serious look at the various cultural backgrounds of New Zealanders.
I felt that there was a growing interest in who we were as a nation and where we'd come from. It's only from time to time that the broadcasters take up an idea like that, because they are seen as highly risky. Will the audience hang in for all of them? Maybe one thing to have a story about a European, an English family, but another thing to have a story about an Asian family.
It's Chinese New Year and the Kwok family of Wellington is celebrating. Already well into its 5th generation, the family has over 100 members, and they get together every weekend to share a meal.
As it turns out, people did come in and watched in significant numbers across the board and were fascinated by who we were as a nation and the complexity of who we were.
In the 1990s, the Asian population grew rapidly, and in 1994, they got their own show.
Namaste, kia ora, apa kabar, sawadee ka.
The program served the purpose to let the Asians among Asians to know each other's culture. Like a lot of Chinese don't know anything about Indians, and vice versa. So through the program, they really know about each other more. The mainstream media always cover one side. They have no access to know about Asians.
Television took a more irreverent look at race relations in 2002.
When I suggested the title to the commissioner at TV3, she just about fell off her chair. She said, oh no, we'll get sued, we can't do that. But I wanted that. I wanted that because I think not only was it provocative, but it was true, because those are the terms we use.
Curry munch is something that I might call my Indian friends as well. You know, you have to earn the right to use the term. And certainly you can toss it off, but it's the context.
Negative slurs and stereotypes and all that can't hurt you if you take them and use them as your own. And that was really the point of the exercise.
This country is so racist. There was an opinion poll in the newspaper, and they asked, would you want to live next to someone Chinese? Right? And just to ask the question is racist. That is a racist, loaded question. Right? And the thing is, if you don't want to live next to Chinese people, get out of our country.
Over the last 50 years, New Zealand television has helped define what being Kiwi really means. And time and again, it's demonstrated the importance of bringing local stories to our screens.
Television has always been a medium with lots and lots of potential, and in a little country, it's more important than ever.
In 10 years' time, we're going to be in a totally different world of television. With the growth of the internet, with the growth of hundreds of channels on pay television, the only thing that's going to make us still tune in to those local channels is some kind of sense of affection, some kind of sense of connection.
So when things are looking really bad and you're thinking of giving it away, remember New Zealand's a cracker. And I reckon come what may, if things get appallingly bad and we're all under constant attack, remember we want to see good clean ball, and for God's sake, feed your backs. We don't know how fortunate we are to have that place. We don't know how propitious are the circumstances, Frederick. We don't know how lucky we are, mate. We don't know how lucky we are.
So thank God for New Zealand On Air. It's been really good.
We saw television as a force for good, as a force for healing.
From facing our past,
we're getting a Māori point of view,
to determining our future.
It dared to challenge not only mainstream, but Māori as well.
Seems like there's one law for me and one law for property developers.
The turbulence.
It was a real clash of cultures.
And the triumphs.
Such a historic moment.
The journey of Māori identity. Prime presents 50 years of New Zealand television, next Sunday.
This Prime News Update is brought